Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from Group 1. The members are Diva Alimah Ad-Din, Muhammad Fuad Fahrudin, Noviana Dwi Gita Putri. In this meeting, we are going to discuss about assessing grammar and vocabulary. For assessing grammar, along with teaching grammar, what has been assessed as a grammar also changed over time. For example, in a grammar translation paradigm, tasks consisted of the learner's ability to recite grammatical rules, provide an accurate translation of a text, and also supply a grammatically accurate word. Although the importance of grammar in language learning hasn't changed, there has been a lot of debate about the place of teaching grammar in the language class. Over the years, the focus on grammar has changed depending on the teaching method. For example, the grammar translation method was more about learning the structures of the language than using it for communicative purposes. In contrast, the direct method didn't focus on grammar teaching at all, because it was thought that grammar would be learned through exposure and interaction. In much the same manner the native speakers acquires their first language. Larson Freeman, influenced by the communicative competence model of language pedagogy, characterized grammatical knowledge to show the interrelatedness of phonology, lexis, syntax, and also semantics. Her conceptualization of grammatical knowledge consisted of three interconnected elements. First, grammatical forms or the structure of a language. Second, the grammatical meanings of those forms. And the third, for the last, their pragmatic meaning or use in a given context. Grammatical knowledge of form, meaning, and use occurs at the sentence level, what is commonly called the discourse level. Discourse constraints include rules for cohesion, information management, and instructional knowledge, which identify relationships in language at the discourse level. Pragmatic meaning depends on the contextual, sociolinguistic, sociocultural, psychological, and rhetorical meanings of the given context. And to assess this grammatical knowledge, we can target one or more of the features of form and meaning. Designing assessment task selected response. The test taker is expected to select the correct response, which is meant to measure the knowledge of grammatical form and/or meaning. For multiple choice tasks, the advantages of this task are that they are easy to administer and score, and the disadvantages are that they are difficult to create and can promote guessing from test takers. For discrimination tasks, discrimination items are used to measure the difference between two similar areas of grammatical knowledge, such as pronouns in subject and object position. For noticing task or consciousness-raising task, in these types of tasks, the test takers are asked to indicate, underline, or circle that they have identified a specific feature in the language sample.
We move to designing assessment tasks, limited production. The input in the item is language or non-language information. It could be single sentence or a longer stretch of discourse. The test takers' response represents only a limited amount of language production. There are two ways in scoring that they are dichotomous and partial credit. The first is dichotomous scoring. It means that there is only one criterion for correctness. It could be form or meaning, and the test takers get it either right and wrong. And the second is partial credit scoring. It used with multiple criteria for correctness with the form and meaning, and allows for adding up the scores for the item in terms of full, partial, or no credit. And limited response can also be scored with holistically or analytically. There are three tasks that use the most common limited production. The first is filling task. The language is presented in the form of sentence, dialogue, or passage in which a number deleted. The Test takers must choose the appropriate response for the deletion or gap based on the context in which the language is present. The second is short answer task. The input is present in the form of a question or question following a reading passage or oral or visual stimulus. This short answer can be scored dichotomously, whether right or wrong, for a single criteria for correctness. And the last is dialogue completion task. The input is presented in the form of a short conversation or dialogue in which a part of exchange of the entire exchange is left blank or the expected response is meant to be grammatically correct. The criterion for correctness can be the form or form and meaning. Next is extended production. The input is usually presented in the form of a prompt. It can vary in length and can be either language or non-language, whether gesture or picture information. The purpose of extended production is to obtain larger amounts of language from test taker and to allow for more creative construction because the responses are usually open-ended. These tasks are often scored using rating scales. Information gap task. This task presents the input in terms of incomplete information, that is, the test taker is given half or some of the information and another is given complementary information. Both of them then have to question each other to get all the information. This type of task is suitable for measuring a test taker's grammatical knowledge to communicate functional meanings and can also be used to measure pragmatic knowledge because the reciprocal nature of the performance requires the language responses to display politeness, formality, appropriateness, and other conversational conventions. And then role play or simulation task. The input in this task present a language or non-language prompt that asks them to take on a role or simulate a situation to solve a problem, make a decision, or perform some transaction collaboratively. The expected response of this task can be used to measure a test taker's knowledge of grammatical form, meaning, and pragmatic use. Assessing vocabulary. Words are the basic building blocks of a language. As a native speakers, we rapidly acquire vocabulary in childhood, and we develop as we grow. But for the for the second language learner, the process is demanding. Sometimes they need more conscientious effort. Some of second language learners make a studied attempt to enlarge their vocabulary, jotting down and memorizing lists of words or relying on their bilingual dictionaries. For others, vocabulary acquisition seems to occur more naturally, the byproduct of an act of automatic language processing. Language researchers and teachers recognize that vocabulary knowledge is integral to overall second language ability and are now focusing on ways to teach vocabulary and assess the knowledge of it.
Okay, moves to defining lexical knowledge. So, what does it mean to know a vocabulary item? One way to answer this question is to try to clarify everything a learner has to do to acquire a vocabulary item. Richards outlined a series of assumptions about vocabulary ability that develop out of linguistic theory. This is the theory. Nation took Richards' approach further by specifying the scope of the learner's tasks include the distinction between receptive and productive vocabulary knowledge. We may be able to recognize a word when we see or hear it, but are we able to use it in our speech or writing? The production of a word requires a different and perhaps more complex set of abilities from those needed of reception of a word. So both modes of performance need to be taken into account in assessment. Move to some considerations in designing assessment tests. There are four considerations that we need to pay attention. First is to clarify your purpose. Second is to define your construct, and third is select your target words, and fourth, determine mode of performance. Okay, to have better understanding of testing receptive and productive vocabulary, we need to clarify these terms further. We can receive and produce vocabulary in two ways. One is recognition and comprehension, whereby learners are presented with a word and asked to show they know the meaning of the word. The following is a classic example of recognition. The second performance is recall and use, where the learner is not presented with the word but provided with some sorts of stimulus that is meant to draw out the target lexical item from the learner's memory. Here is the example. Okay, move to designing assessment tests. Receptive vocabulary. First of all, it's important to consider what role the context plays the test item. One function of the context is to indicate a specific meaning of a high-frequency word. Second, learner must be able to recognize the word based on a given context. Here is the example. Next is, in the case of low-frequency words, even a limited context can provide information that will enable the test taker to recognize and infer the meaning of the lexical item. Items need to contain some amount of contextual information for the test taker to get the item correct, as in the following example. Okay, move to designing assessment tests. Receptive vocabulary. Another type of receptive vocab assessment test is the well-known and widely used matching exercise. This type of recognition test requires test takers to match the target with its meaning definition, as in the following example. One frequently used test to assess a learner's vocabulary size is word association. The procedure involves presenting the target words as a stimulus to test takers and asking them to say the first word and that comes to their mind. But in recent years, this methodology has seldom been used because researchers found that the second language learners produce varying word associations that were not helpful determining their vocabulary size. So instead, it was changed from asking the test takers to supply the word to asking them to select a word. Okay, moves to designing assessment tests, productive vocabulary. Productive tests which involve recurrent use also better perform with the context of situation. A common vocabulary test type is sentence completion, where the target vocabulary item is deleted from a sentence and the test taker must understand the context in which words occurs in order to produce the missing words, as the following in the example. Going beyond a single sentence, longer passages provide opportunities to assess other aspects of vocabulary knowledge. Thus, in addition to word meaning, the form and use of a lexical item can be assessed. The selective deletion clause or gap fill test is one type of the test that draws on these aspects of word knowledge. In this selective deletion clause or gap fill test, the test taker must be able to identify not only the meaning but also the form of the lexical item that is needed to fill in the blank.